Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Adventures. And today we're going to be doing part 77 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So really awesome today. We've got a few really cool animals. We've got some nice pack from Luca that we always know and love, and we've got some Hockowl mods, so I'm quite excited to get stuck into this one. But we're going to be starting off with Osmacosaurus, or Osmacosaurus, by Netraptor and Castlecog. Look at this wonderful guy. Let's see if it'll... Oh, here we go. So, Osmacosaurus means canyon lizard, with Osmaca meaning canyon in the Lakota language. So these guys were a genus of herbivorous iguanodontian dinosaur. It was quite basal to that group, so they lived around the early Cretaceous of what is now Buffalo Gap in South Dakota in the US, and is known from the Chilson member of the Lakota Formation, and was named in 2011 by Andrew T. McDonald as the type species of Zombacosaurus depressicus, which doesn't mean it was actually sad, it was just, found in a canyon, hence depressed, depression in the earth. So the holotype itself was discovered by Nelson Harold Darton in 1896 within a layer of the Lakota Formation, and the type species was originally referred to Camptosaurus, which is another basal iguanodontian from the late Jurassic, much more famous relative. And then it was previously referred to as Camptosaurus depressicus when it was first described by Charles W. Gilmore in 1909. And then it was assigned to the genus Plancoxia, as Plancoxia depressica in 2008. And then in 2011 was named of its own genus, Osmacosaurus. So that's pretty cool. Definitely a big fan of that. So yeah, really nice dinosaur. It's like a dinosaur that's not too different from its relatives, but gives us another cool opportunity to look at some awesome mods. You can see how really awesome this guy looks. I really like this red and yellowish one. It really fits quite nice. I like the patterns there, almost like the really lines going down here. Anatomy's spot on, as per usual. You can even see those little hands. So these are very much like Camptosaurus, but a little bit later. But yeah, really cool. Definitely a big fan. So again, this was done by Netraptor Castlecog. Both did a really great job. Alright, so now we're going to be having a look at Hypacrosaurus, done by Master Dude. Here's a really interesting dinosaur. So let's see if we get one that's in the light that's a good color. No, I might have to just let them walk a bit. That could be alright. Alright, we'll have a look at you, since you're in a nice position. So this is Hypacrosaurus, or Hypacrosaurus, which means near the highest lizard. So Greek is hypto means less, acros is high, so it's like near the highest lizard, or near high, less high. Because it was actually almost, but not quite as large as Tyrannosaurus, so it's quite interesting. So these guys were a genus of duck-billed dinosaur, closely related to things like Cretoxyrhina. And you can see they've got a tall, hollow crest that they would have used potentially to make sounds. So there's two different species, these Altispinus and Sternbergi. Sturbingi, which is Altospinus, is named by Brown in 1913, and the other one was found in 1994. So the type species was, the type remains were found in 1910 by Barnum Brown for the American Museum of Natural History from a partial postcranial skeleton and has vertebrae and pelvis, found in the Red Deer Formation of what is now Alberta, which is now known as the Horseshoe Canyon. So probably quite famous for a lot of you guys that know a lot of dinosaurs from there. And then it was named in 1913 as a new genus, as considered to be like Saurolophus. And no skull was known at the time, but since 2 skulls have been found, which is quite cool. So during this time, the remains of a small hollow-crested dinosaur with their own species, Shunosaurus, which was then lumped into, these guys, and also Procenosaurus, were lumped into this Hypacrosaurus. And the type species, as I mentioned, there's Altospinus, which is type species, and then new species was found from a variety of remains. That's from hatchlings and things like that, from the late Campanian, which is a little bit older, and is considered Altospinus. So the Sternbergi was kind of known from an unknown, but quite a lot of individuals. And the hypothesis they form a neutral group actually comes from the redescription of Nippanosaurus. So it seems that these guys are actually more closely related to each other, which means they could be potentially the same genus. So the easiest way to tell them apart from other dactyl dinosaurs, rather hadrosaurs, or lambeosaurians even, if you want to be more particular, they have quite tall neural spines in the shape of a crest at the top of the vertebrae, which can be 5 to 7 times the height of the body with the respective vertebrae on the back. That gives it quite a tall profile, which is pretty cool. It's more pointed at the top, and the airways actually do not. And also in their crest, the airways do not make an S-curve. And they're estimated to be quite big, so they were thought to be about 9 meters or about 30 feet long and weighed up to 4 tons. And as with most duckbills, their skeleton was not particularly remarkable, but they did have that really interesting kind of crest on their back. And the 2 different species look quite different. The Altospinus is kind of the one that's more looks stereotypically. So Altospinus has a really, really high back and really, really tall crest. The other one's got like more of a like a slanted one. This one probably looks like Stibingi, more like Stibingi, which is not the type species. In terms of classification, as I mentioned, it is a Lambeosaurian hadrosaur, so I did things like Cretoxyrhina and Lambeosaurus. And actually, Jack Horner and Phil Curry in 1994 suggested that the Sternbergi species is actually a transition between Lambeosaurus and Hypacrosaurus altospinus, so that's quite interesting. And it seems these guys also form a clade with animals like Nippanosaurus and Titan, but this following cladogram actually includes things like Multipolian would be within Hypacrosaurus. So it's kind of, could be paraphyletic at the moment, which is quite interesting. In terms of its paleobiology, in terms of, how it differs from other hadrosaurs, it's not very different, big herbivore, dental batteries for chewing. And these guys would have had tubercates, like this crest would have been likely for display, so either visual signals for species or sex, and also produce resonating sounds, so they would be able to communicate like that. Also probably warm-blooded, and we do have a lot of eggs from these guys. They actually kind of had lines of arrested growth, and they seem to have grown quite rapidly, growing quite fast, which is quite cool. And even cells, looking at them, suggest that these guys kind of grew like ratites, things like that, which is quite cool. Like emu, they can compare them up, so they would have these chemical markers would have been quite similar in the emu cells. And then there's also been discoveries of tooth marks in these guys from Tyrannosaurids, so these guys were most likely prey for local Tyrannosaurs. This we'll get into. And in terms of the environment it lived in the Horseshoe Canyon Formation with famous animals like Saurolophus and Montosaurus and Odontosaurus and Montonia, Pachyrhinosaurus, Ornithomimus, Truthiomimus, and Albertosaurus. And this was the younger one, so Altospinus was a little bit younger. So these guys would have been living together, but the older species, Sternbergi, lived with Maiasaura, Troodon, Diplocaulus, and Inosaurus and Rubosaurus, so they would have lived in a very interesting habitat there. And I believe this is supposed to be Sternbergi because it looks very much more like Sternbergi, or Sternbergi, however you say it. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan. Another great one from Master Dude. Master Dude always does a great job with the mods that they make, especially including Hawkal1215, who's coming next. So next up, we've got, by Hawkal1215, we have got Shunosaurus. Here's another banging Hockel mod. I do love Hockel's mods. It really came out wonderfully. So we'll have a look at you two in your pretty position. We'll have to move back to look at your detail, though, I think. But here we've got Shunosaurus, which means the lizard from Sujan, which is a species of sauropod dinosaur that came from the late Jurassic, about the Oxfordian, in the Sichuan province of China from about 161 to 157 million years ago. And name reminds from Shu, which is the ancient name for the province of the Sichuan province. So this dinosaur was first discovered in 1997 when a group of students, practicing paleontologists, like excavation at a road bank, and the type species Shunosaurus lil was named by Dong Shuming, Zhao Xingju, and Shan Yihong in 1983. The species name, or the generic name, comes from Shu, the name places, and the specific name honors hydrologist Li Bing, who was the governor of Xuzhang in the 3rd century BC. So a little bit of history there. The holotype was collected from the lower Xingshangmos formation in near Dozhong, and it contains a partial skeleton, and later about 20 more major specimens have been found that include several complete and near complete individuals, skulls, and juveniles, making it one of the best anatomically known of all the sauropods, with 94% of their elements found. So we do have a pretty good idea what Shunosaurus looks like, which is pretty cool. And then there was a proposed second species, Dinosaurus shujilensis, which was considered to be a smaller older form, that never been formally described in Nomanubium. But yeah, all the Dinosaurs display at the Zhingong Dinosaur Museum, so that's quite cool. In 2024, there was a partially semi-articulated skeleton that was found and has really interesting as well. It was considered to be kind of a little bit later and was considered to be a separate species based on the kernel girdle, but they were described either both very similar to both Xuezong and Kermosaurus, which is quite interesting. In terms of its description, though, these guys were kind of small for a sauropod. They got to about 11 meters, or about 36 feet, though some more complete finds indicate a somewhat smaller size. Some have estimated to be up to 9.5 meters long, so quite small for a sauropod considering, and about 3 tons. They were very short-necked for a sauropod, but there are sauropods with shorter necks, like Brachytrachelopan, which I've covered a couple times. The skull is mostly complete, and from disculated, these guys had a very broad, short and deep skull, and was extremely narrow and pointed. And the teeth were also fairly robust, and they had a very cylindrical body, and are quite interesting as well. And also published in 1989, what makes Shunosaurus quite different is that these guys had a tail club, which was on the end of the tail. It had 2 successive spikes and some sharp, cone-shaped osteoderms, which was the length of 5 centimeters or 20 inches. And the club was probably used to fend off predators, so it could have been for defense, but also fighting each other. In terms of its relationships, it was considered a member of the Cetosauridae, which is, so it includes things like Cetosaurus. But then analyses kind of put it within the Hypacrosauridae, so this would have been closely related to other Chinese Jurassic sauropods. However, there was another analysis that put it was very basal between Neurosauropoda, and actually believed to be related to Rotetosaurus from Queensland and Australia, so that's quite an interesting little history there. Its neck indicates, in terms of its paleobiology, would have been a low browser, so these guys would have had large jaws, eat a large amount of coarse plant material. And these guys account for 90% of the fauna found in the formations, that suggests it was a dominant or common member in the ecosystem, or just preferred habitats that like to be fossilized. And it shared its habitats with animals such as Dontosaurus, Omaeosaurus, and Protonactosaurus, which are all sauropods. And then other dinosaurs include Huangosaurus, Zoonosaurus, and the theropod Gasosaurus. So it was a pretty packed ecosystem, and really, really awesome. I love his mods. Dockow mods, it really comes out always super awesome. You can see got the correct feet and everything, and nice to see Shunosaurus, a dinosaur that deserves a bit of love in the pack. Really, really awesome. So you run off and do your thing. So that's a 1 Hockel mod done. Now we've got another Hockel mod. So again, done by Hockel1215. We've got something with a little bit of history attached to it. We've got Pterodactylus. So let's see if we can get one in a good light. Where's one? So he's a little bit small, but you can see, get a good look at him. Let's see. It's the kind of the hard thing about these. Well, have a look at you. You look like a nice position. But no, like you're perfect. You're perfect. Look at this guy. This is Pterodactylus. So Pterodactylus, which means a winged finger, these guys are an extinct genus of pterosaur, and are thought to be the only species is Pterodactylus antiquus, and was the first pterosaur ever named and identified, and one of the first prehistoric reptiles ever discovered. So it's got a very important history. So the type specimen of this species was first found in 1784 and was found in Sumholfen limestone, kind of in Germany. And then the specimens were given to Count Ferdinand as Palpatine Pappenheim in 1780, who actually recovered a lithographic limestone from that time. And then it was kind of found in those early 1700s, and people were just trying to interpret what the hell it looked like. There was some 1830 interpretations that made it aquatic with like huge flippers. There was some interpretations that they had it look like a bat with like its fingers coming around to the ankle and creating this weird wing. And it actually was interpreted to be like a mammal and had fur, which is kind of actually forward thinking considering pterosaurs have pectinofibers. They also thought they were somewhere between bird and mammals and things like that, so we really just had no idea what was going on with these guys. Then we found more specimens and things like that, and then by 1815 it was kind of figured out, and they were given the name Pterodactylus antiquus as a type species. And then Ornithocephalus was a synonym, so a lot of these species describe different species and then kind of all lumped into one. So luckily these guys are known from quite a few good specimens. So there are about 30 specimens of Pterodactylus found, and though mostly belong to juveniles, they may prefer skeletons, but they were in general pretty small pterosaur. There was some still bigger ones found. An estimated adult wingspan is just over a meter, so about 1.4 meters, based on the only isolated adult specimen who has just the skull. That other specimens have been smaller. Although the smaller specimens actually have been shown to represent juveniles of Pterodactylus. There's also things like Pseudochasma, Germandactylus, Azoridaco, Gnathosaurus, and Aerodactylus, which is pretty cool. So the skulls of these guys you can see quite long and thin, with about 90 conical teeth that are quite narrow, and these extend right back to the tip of the jaw, though unlike the other relatives, these teeth were absent from the upper jaw tip and relatively uniform in size, which is quite interesting. And like related pterosaurs, they did have a crest consisting mainly of soft tissues, and this crest kind of extends to the back of the skull from the back edge of the indomitable fenestra, seen very similar to other related pterosaurs. And they didn't find evidence of the crest extending past the back of the skull. However, two specimens have a low bony crest on their skulls, and at a maximum height of 0.9 meters. So it's very possible there's some species or some specimens that show evidence of that extending past the frill like that. But it's kind of, up to interpretation sometimes. So in terms of his life history, these guys, like other pterosaurs, they can vary considerably depending on their, age and or level of maturity. So these guys, as they grew, the skull and the size of their shape, then the skull and the size of their number of teeth actually grew, and historically this led to various growth stages being represented as new species, but actually they're all just growth stages. So the youngest specimens have a small number of teeth as few as 15, and these teeth have a broad base. And then these guys kind of get into two distinct year classes. So in the first year class, the skull is only about 15 or to 45 millimeters in length, and the second year they get up to 55 to 95 millimeters in length, or about 2.2 to 3.7 inches, but still immature. So you can see they kind of get bigger and bigger and then grow up. So in terms of their growth and breeding season, they actually these distinct classes of year, very similar to other species like Rhamphorhynchus, suggest that they bred seasonally and grew continuously throughout their lifetime. A new generation of first year class B antiquus have been produced seasonally, and the second one would have been the next generation has, and have these like clusters of age sizes. And they probably consist of individuals that had just begun to fly that were less than 1 year old, and the second class was at 2 years, and the rest of classes are specimens over 2 years old. And these patterns are actually quite similar to modern crocodilians, so they did grow up like it's more similar to modern crocodilians than those of birds, because they are precocial, they're ready to go right out the box pretty much. And daily activity patterns, looking at the size of their eyes, actually suggest that these guys may be diurnal, and that's how they could have avoided competing with other pterosaurs like Rhamphorhynchus and Pseudochasma, which have been interpreted to be nocturnal. And based on their diet, these guys have suggested to be a predator, feeding on small animals and feeding on mainly invertebrates, and had a generalist feeding strategy, so pretty much eat lots of small things, and actually had a relatively high bite force, so these guys may have been a little bit better adapted for eating hard-shelled things, like hard beetles and things like that. So really interesting that we can learn about their ecology there. In terms of its paleoecology, they have been found to be some Holfen limestone in Germany, and with lots of limestone, things like that. This is considered a Lagerstadt, where there's like a wide range of different creatures found, even things like jellyfish, which are notoriously hard to be preserved. And these guys would have lived with all sorts of different pterosaurs, like Rhamphorhynchus and Anthracosaurus, Pterodactylus, and a bunch of others. Eurygnathus as well. But also dinosaurs, they would have lived with Compsognathus and Archaeopteryx. And then various lizards and all sorts of metricanthid or like marine crocodiles. So it was a very rich ecosystem. And in terms of its relationships with its other animals, as I mentioned, it was like the first one, but the most recent taxonomy suggests that these guys were closely related to the chasmids, which are another really interesting, or pseudochasmids, which are really interesting groups of pterosaurs, and they may be more closer to the more advanced gynopterids, and sometimes fall outside these groups. So it's kind of where exactly it fits, we really don't know, but it seems these guys would have been like a really basal internal chasmid, and kind of that really like first of these pterosaurs that didn't have long tails and things like that. And plus there was lots of different species. It was considered a waste bucket taxon, so lots of things were ascribed to it, like Somachelys and things like that. Pteranodon was actually considered to be a species of Pterodactylus, where against the way a lot of people consider it a pterodactyl and not Pteranodon. And there's other species that have been considered controversial, and lots of different species described over the past like 200 or so years that has been known. But yeah, that's interesting as well. And it actually is considered one of the most iconic prehistoric creatures because it was called pterodactyl, and typically pterodactyl now refers to anything that's a pterosaur, even though pterodactyl refers to just Pterodactylus and just things with large wings, things like that. But yeah, really, really cool. How can you not love these guys? Another nice little bit of history. I do always love Hockel for giving us some cool animals, especially like stuff that's new. How can you not love these little guys? Love them. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Alright, so now I'm going to let you run off. Next up, we've got by Gushigor. We've already covered this mod a couple episodes ago, but we've got a new cosmetic. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about the species, but I'm going to talk about the more basic things, just so you know what Cretoxyrhina actually is. Let's let you swim out there and have a good look, have a good lease on life, So that's quite cool, isn't he? So this is Cretoxyrhina, which means Cretaceous sharptooth. These guys are a species of large mackerel shark that lives between 107 to 73 million years ago, so between the late Amphibian and the late Companion of the late Cretaceous. The type species, Mantelli, is commonly referred to as the Ginsu shark, and was first specialized because its teeth look like the Ginsu knife, and it's like slicing and dicing that you use for the knife. And they've kind of traditionally been considered the sole member of the family Cretoxyrhinidae, but other placements have put it within Lamnidae and Elapedidae, so related to modern mackerel sharks. These guys were quite huge, though, in comparison to great white. These guys got about 8 meters long, rather the great white's biggest one's 6 meters, and they would have weighed just under 5 tons. It was considered one of the largest sharks of all time. It had quite a similar appearance to a modern great white, because it's, a similar ecology, but it was an apex predator in its ecosystem, feeding on large marine animals such as mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, sharks, and other large fish, and pterosaurs, and even occasionally potentially dinosaurs, which is quite cool. And their teeth got to about 8 centimeters, or about 3 inches long. The razor sharp and had thick enamel that preserves quite well, so we know about these guys, and was quite good at slicing and stepping into prey. And also some evidence suggests that these guys were among the fastest swimming sharks, and they would have got to speeds up to 70 kilometers an hour. And it's been speculated they hunted by lunging on their prey to inflict powerful blows, quite similar to modern great whites. So another great example of convergent evolution. So since the late 1900s, there's been several fossils of particularly well-preserved specimens of Cretoxyrhina found, especially in Kansas. So that really gives us, unlike a lot of other prehistoric sharks, a pretty good look at what it actually looked like. So the original mod had like a little spine thing that a lot of modern sharks wouldn't have, and we know it didn't have because we have such well-preserved Cretoxyrhina specimens. So this one, which is from Dinosauria, if you remember the Dead Sound, series Dinosauria, which was like a couple short films, and this was featured in the Sea and Skies one. This actually fits much more scientifically what we know Cretoxyrhina to look like, which is quite cool. We know that it grew quite rapidly during its early years and would have reached sexual maturity at about 4 to 5 years old, and had a lifespan of about 40 years, which is actually maybe a little bit of an underestimate considering great whites have been known to live to 70, 80 years. And another analysis suggests that these guys actually had facial and optical features more similar to those of thresher sharks and crocodile sharks. So you can see it kind of looks like a thresher shark in that regard, with that more, rounded face, which is a great example of, how it's not just a great white. So this is actually backed by a lot of evidence. So this is actually pretty spot on what a real-life Cretoxyrhina probably did look like compared to the original mod. So yeah, quite awesome. We'll have a look at you two guys over here, why not? Like they actually look kind of cute to me. And actually suggested very much like modern great whites, they would have had regional endothermy, so they would have been able to keep certain parts of their body warmer, which would have allowed them to, keep a lot warmer and move into cooler areas. And hence they lived in a cosmopolitan. So as a apex predator, they would have been top predators in the ecosystem and would have been cosmopolitan, so found pretty much all over the world. And fossils have been found worldwide, even though they're most frequently found in the Western Interior Seaway in North America. And at that time, America was divided into two by the Western Interior Seaway, where there was a shallow sea and lots of famous dinosaurs or prehistoric animals have been found down that way. Even, as I mentioned, some dinosaurs as well. They seem to prefer subtropical to temperate regions, very similar to modern great whites, with waters as cold as up to 5 degrees Celsius, or 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they saw their peak in size during their Croatian, but subsequently kind of declined until their extinction in the Campanian. And one factor believed to be this demise was the increasing predators that came in around the same time. Things like mosasaurs and other big predators would have been competition. And this is possible factors that may have led for their gradual extinction. So yeah, really, really cool. So yeah, that's kind of the general one. If you want a little bit more information, I suggest you go back to, I think it's the one before this one, so it's be 75. Or, yeah, I think so, 75. I did go a lot more in depth into the Cretoxyrhina original mod, but I thought I'd just be a little bit more concisive with this one because I've already covered it, and so recently too. But you can see this one's a little bit more anatomically accurate. As I mentioned, looks more a little like a hybrid between a thresher shark and a great white shark, which basically would have been in life. So yeah, really, really awesome mod, and really brings that really cool animation. I love the Dinosauria series. It's pretty cool to see dinosaurs in a way like that and scientifically accurate. And this is pretty much as accurate as you get for a Cretoxyrhina. We do have a pretty good idea of what it looks like. And it looks, as you can see, it's not just a great white. It looks like a mix between a thresher shark and a great white. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of that Cretoxyrhina. Alright. So we're going to be moving on now to, really, really awesomely, we've got a pack by Luca that introduced 4 new prehistoric amphibians. And how can you not love amphibians? I do always love my amphibians. So let's have a look at the first species, Ichthyostega. Let's see which one we can get a good look at. Little friend, look how cute they are. So this is Ichthyostega, which means fish roof in Latin. These guys are an extinct genus of tetrapodomorph that was from the late Devonian of what is now Greenland, and is considered one of the earliest four-limbed animals in the fossil record, and one of the first with weight-bearing adaptations for walking on land. So this is one of the first animals to walk on land that was a tetrapod, or that was a a vertebrate. There were obviously lots of bugs and things and insects and invertebrates that were on land at the time. So these guys would have actually had lungs that allowed them to live in the swamp, and even though they've been often labelled a tetrapod because of their limbs and fingers, they evolved long before the true tetrapods came around, and are often more referred to as a stegocephalon or a stem tetrapod, and likewise it would have likely been very much like a amphibian build and habitat, kind of like that, which is quite cool. And in late 20th century, it actually stood alone as the only traditional fossil between, when we came back onto land. By new research, these guys would have had very interesting anatomy, actually kind of more like seals than those of salamanders. So they're really interesting, quite cool. In terms of its history, it was first discovered in 1932, which were 4 specimens were described of Ichthyostega from the late Devonian of East Greenland, when one species belonging to the genus Ichthyostepterus, which is Agent Willemni. And because of these morphological differences, they're considered synonymous because it wasn't really pronounced, and they were only different from like slight position, things like that. But more specimens, there's been 14 specimens collected in 1931, and then there's been an additional specimens of Ichthyostega collected between 1933 and 1955. So these guys were fairly large, and you can see they've got a quite broad build. They would have been just under 1.5 meters long, or just under 5 feet long. And the skull was low with dorsally placed and large labyrinthodont teeth, and the posterior margin of the skull had covering the gills as well, called an ossiculum, and the spiracle was at the optic notch between each eye, which is quite cool. So the postcranial skeleton, as you can see, was actually large. His legs were quite large compared to its relatives, so most likely weight-bearing. And also, very interesting, it had 7 digits, as when you look at their feet there. So it had 7 digits on each hind limb, along with the peculiar ossified mass which aligns the into joints. So the exact number of digits on the forelimb are not yet known, since fossils of hand have been found, but we know they had 7 digits on their back limbs, which is a lot compared to pretty much all tetrapods today have 5 or less. So ancestrally we all had 5, and some have lost them down to pretty much 1. So like horses, they only have the 1 leg or the 1 foot or the 1 toe, you could say. These guys have 7 digits, so this shows that they're actually not quite different. But in the water, these guys would have been more like a fleshy paddle than a fin. And also the vertebral column is also quite unusual and highly specialized compared to both its contemporaries and tetrapods, as these guys had torn spines that arched backwards, and they were quite big, and then they decrease in size and have that lamp of vertebrae that suggests that these guys would have had quite large ribs as well. And they also had a low fin that suggests that these guys would have been less useful for swimming, so they may be able to swim a little bit. They're more like a crocodile, but they were much more adapted for walking around on land. So in terms of its close relatives, there's also Ichthyostega. These guys kind of seem to be a little bit more fish-like, but their pelvic girdle is actually a little bit more better adapted for walking on land. Also had more supportive ribs and stronger vertebrae. So these guys may have been a little bit of debating, a little bit of niche partitioning. So these guys may have been a little bit better at hunting on land. Just something to keep them apart, which is quite interesting. And they would have ventured on land on occasion, so they would have been probably quite good at it, walking around on land. And traditionally, in terms of their relatives, they were considered the group Ichthyostega, which is now considered a paraphyletic group of lots of primitive stem tetrapods. And now they're kind of also considered intermediate between kind of stegocephalian stem tetrapods. So they're kind of in between, things like Tiktaalik and, things a little bit more later. So things like Cassodrinus from the Carboniferous and crown group tetrapods, which includes everything that has a backbone that lives on land, even whales, which is quite interesting because they evolved from that. In terms of its paleobiology, these guys they would have differed from early other species, things like Usurpatin and Pachybryngichthys, as they had much more adaptations for living on land than those kind of species. These guys would have had lungs, but they would have still used gills. They're primarily made for just getting rid of carbon dioxide. They also use their bodies and tails for locomotion, and their fins for steering and braking, and they would have used their forelimbs for on land, and then their tails for swimming. And these massive rib cage, they would have had a largely fish-like spine, but they would have had a stronger skeletal structure to be able to pull out of the water, and even maybe been able to help evolve with a lack of buoyancy, so they would need to be stronger to hold their weight. The hind limbs were also much smaller than the forelimbs, and they unlikely to have borne full weight as an adult, and while broad overlapping ribs, would have increased that side-to-side motion. So these guys are believed to kind of drag themselves along like a mud skipper or potentially a seal, which was incapable of the quadrupedal gaits needed for natural roadie motion range. So these guys wouldn't have been running around on land, but they would have been proficient enough, to survive and, evolve into other species that would eventually become us. So a great step in evolution. So let's let these guys run out. They're really, really cool. Let them run out. So next up, we've got Platyhystrix. So another really, really cool species, also done by Luca. So we've got these guys. So these guys are kind of from the a little bit later. So these guys are from the latest kind of Nominivorous and the early Permian. So this game, Platyhystrix, means flat porcupine, because Hystrix is the genus name for old world porcupines. These are an extinct temnospondyle amphibian with a distinctive sail along its back, very similar to like Dimetrodon and Edaphosaurus. Completely unrelated synapsids, but these great example of convergent evolution. So they would have lived on the boundary between the latest Cretaceous and early Permian periods, from what is now Fort Kansas, Texas, and Kansas about 300 million years ago. And not much is known, but the majority of the fossils do show this compressed neural spine and fractured skull fragments, and is the only member within the genus, and is kind of related to the family Dinosauridae, but it has been debated and may actually be kind of related to the modern ancestors of modern amphibians, like your Sicilians and frogs and salamanders, which is quite interesting. So the holotype was found in New Mexico in an early cutler formation. The holotype has a few fragmented neural spines, and then was under the species names Anthracosaurus and Finis, and then was redescribed, then Cetosaurus, and then description of Platyhystrix initially classified a new specimen, and then it was C.J. Wilson who created the genus Platyhystrix in 1911 and placed it within the Temnospondyli order fragments in 1916, so that's where it kind of got its proper name from. In terms of its skull, it's compared to its relatives, they do have quite a large skull. It's about 19 centimeters along the midline, as well as being long and narrow when analysed from dorsal view. They had lots of dermal sculpting around it and later portions of the skull, which is quite interesting. And they may have had upwards of 65 teeth on either side of the jaw, with like these simple peg-like teeth, which is quite interesting. Also, the dorsal blades you can see here, these really long neural spines, thought actually to be extensions of the neural arch above the transverse process. And it seems that these guys were really curious about these ornamentation. They were curious whether it was just like a osteoderms or actual part of the spine, but they seemed to definitely be part of the neural spine, so they were like that. And it's estimated that the sail was made up by 11 to 15 laterally compressed and distally expanded, or basically flattened and elongated plates. And much of these lengths were covered by ridges and pulses, similar to the ornamentation of the skull. And similar to Edaphosaurus, there would have been like little tubercles going on it as well, which is quite cool. And the purpose of these blades is not really known, but very similar to other species, things like Dimetrodon and Elaphiosaurus being suggested to be for like sexual display, thermoregulation, species recognition, and other things like that, but really we don't know. In terms of its paleobiology, they may have been preyed upon by larger animals such as urops or large carnivorous reptiles, which are much more common in the Permian. And you can see they've got a quite frog-like face, quite big skull, and a compact body that reached about 1 meter long, and these guys would have been mainly terrestrial. And also being rather unusual, these guys were, as I mentioned, the dorsal vertebrae, they would have had that sail, and we don't know why he had that sail, but it's kind of one of those things. As I mentioned these as well, these guys are actually well known from the southwestern United States, found in the Wolfhampton age of about 295 to 280 million years ago, from the late Carboniferous into the early early Permian. So it's quite cool. And in terms of paleobiology, these guys would have situated about 10 degrees north of the equator in the western edge of Pangaea. So these guys would have kind of had rivers and stuff around this place, and these guys would have had a paleoclimate that would have been quite warm, but they're quite dry. So the kind of plants you'd find then would have been more seasonal and drier. And they would have lived with other animals such as Elaphiosaurus, fish and amphibians, and lots of reptiles, and also large ectotherms. Suggests that these guys would have had a temperature range of about 25 to 41 degrees Celsius, but not dropping below 5 degrees in the winter season. So in terms of its phylogeny, its last thing, it was considered to be amongst the Dinosauridae, but it has been highly contested. But most recently, the relationships of these guys are considered to be much more related to modern-day amphibians, due to the consensus of their monophyletic group derived from Dinosaurs. And these guys have kind of constructed this, origin, really amphibian origin. So these guys are believed to be an early ancestor of all those lovely modern amphibians that you know and love, which is quite cool. And we'll have a look at this guy. So he's posing for us. You can really see that frog-like skull, and how can you not love this little guy? He's so cute. So yeah, this is like an early relative of all our modern, modern amphibians. So that's quite cool. I'm definitely a big fan. So we're going to let you run off and do your thing. So next up, we've got another really famous one. I know you guys will all know and love this one. We've already covered this in, I think, Planet Zoo. Yep, we covered in Planet Zoo. We've got Diplocaulus. I know he hovers a bit. It's still a really, really awesome one. Let's see if we can get a good look at one. Yeah. I like this one. So this is Diplocaulus, which means double stalk. These are an extinct genus of leptospondyle amphibian from the late Carboniferous to late Permian of North America and Africa. And they're kind of by far the biggest of their group and best known because they have that really interesting boomerang skull, as you can kind of see going on there. And remains of Diplocaulus have been found in late Permian of Morocco, which represent the youngest occurrence of a leptospondyle. So these guys, you can see, are quite a stocky, very salamander-like build, and they got up to about 1 meter long. Although their complete tails are unknown, a nearly completed articulated skeleton provided a row of tail vertebrae near the head, and these guys seem to have a long tail, a thin tail that was able to reach in the head if the animal was curled up. And most studies actually suggest that these guys kind of swam very much like eels, very eel-like swimming, or anguilliform, which is quite cool. But their most interesting characteristics you kind of see here is that really, really boomerang-shaped skull. And we'll have a look at it from the top. It looks so weird, but I'll get into it. It's the long protrusions from the skull makes it look like a boomerang. These are actually big elongations of the squamosal bone, which is quite cool. And merely early sources considered it to be tubular, but however a lot have doubted this, and they actually argued that the bone was the supratemporal bone, and then they kind of looked at relatives of Diplocaulus, and based on observations it was actually tabular bones. So that's quite interesting. And there have been a few different species described. The type species is Salamanderoides. There are a few other species. The biggest species is the most common one is Macronogus, which is the most common one, and also the most well-described one. And there's a few other derpy species. I'm not going to go too much into the species because I believe we cover them. But everyone's been curious, what's the function of these large horns, or these tabular horns? There was believed also they protected external gills. They suggest they may have been maladaptive, but there have been some also that suggested they may have supported large skin flaps and may have been able to help with, almost like a salamander or a skate, stingray or a skate. So they're kind of, able to flap the skin to swim like that. And they're also believed to be involved in respiration. But a new hypothesis actually suggests this may have been to help with a lift. So these guys basically acted as a hydrofoil, so it allowed them to actually lift their head, from would be able to lift the body up from in the water column, which is quite cool. And another really cool thing as well, there's actually a trio of 3 juvenile Diplocaulus in a burrow of 8 plus 1 juvenile Europs that have been found and partially eaten by a Dimetrodon. So we actually found them in the drought. So these guys, like other amphibians, they probably would have created cocoons and things, and kind of hibernated during a drought, and when it come back when the waters came back. But yeah, really, really cool. Have you not loved Diplocaulus? Another really awesome animal. Lovely mod. So we're going to let them run off and do their things. And then we're going to have a look at our last animal. Who's last, but certainly not least, is definitely the biggest of the pack. So this whole pack was made by Luca, which is the Ancient Amphibians pack, which introduced these 4 wonderful new amphibians into Jurassic World Evolution 2. So yeah, let's have a look. Here's Anthracosaurus. Let's have a look at one that's... We'll have a look at you. You got a nice pattern to you. So this is Anthracosaurus, which is a extinct genus of Embolomere, which comes from the late Carboniferous, so about 315 million years ago, and is from Scotland, England, and Ohio, which were all kind of connected at the time. Measuring at about 10 feet or about 3 meters long, these guys were large aquatic predators and had a robust skull of up to 40 centimeters long, or just over a foot long, and with large teeth, and also on the roof of the mouth as well. And Anthracosaurus actually would have lived around rivers and lakes, and it gets its name, which means a Greek coal lizard, because the Carboniferous is famous for having lots of coal. And even though it's not a lizard, it looks a lot like a lizard. So in terms of discoveries, the genus and type specimen Anthracosaurus russellii was found by Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, in 1863, based on the fossils of surveyor James Russell in 1861, who he got the name after. The holotype was quite large, and it took more than a century to actually fully prepare the specimen, which is quite interesting. And then the other fossils have found teeth, vertebrae, and interclavicle, so these guys would have been quite huge. There was also a second, less complete skull that was attributed to the same species, found in England in 1981, and they described a couple other spots, an isolated jugal bone and a partial skull roof from Newsham in Northumberland. And in Ohio, there was another species found. It was originally called Rhizodus lacifer, but then was described as Anthracosaurus lassiter, which is a new species. Has isolated teeth, vertebrae, and these snout and shoulder girdle. And large. They actually showed the quite enlarged premaxillary teeth, which is a trait found in other American embolithers such as Eobathes and Netropalaxus. And then another one has been found as there was Letrophagus obsoletus, which is actually found to be an early growth stage of Anthracosaurus lacifer. So there's 2 different species, and the type species russellii, the American one is lacifer. But yeah, really, really cool. Would have been a big predator in their ecosystem. So he's mentioned 3 meters long. It's about the size of a crocodile, or a small crocodile, or something like a Cuban crocodile. But yeah, really, really awesome. I love how it's come out. It's on the Dimetrodon. Really, really awesome. Another great mod by Luca. So, I think this is a great place to finish the video. So, yeah, thank you, thank you, Netraptor and Castlecog, Master Dude, Hawkowl, Gushigore, and Luca. All you guys have really made some awesome mods. Definitely a big fan. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So, yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.